welcome to the Maitri podcast Between Friends, Conversations with Maitri. I'm your host, Nandini Ray, and if this is your first time tuning in, Maitri is a free, confidential, non-profit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We are dedicated to supporting South Asians facing domestic violence and abuse, while also raising awareness to prevent it. Today, we are excited to bring you the second presentation of our Policy Matters segment. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Policy Matters, a quarterly presentation from Maitri Policy Advocacy, where we discuss public policies that are at the heart of shaping the way prevention, intervention, and overall awareness impact domestic violence advocacy within our communities. My name is Smitha Chandrasekhar, and I am a senior at the University of Washington studying biology, as well as a member of the Maitri Policy Advocacy team.
Imagine a new immigrant in this country that has no connection, doesn't know anybody, doesn't know who this person can talk to when she's going through an abusive situation. Her lifeline is a telephone number, and that's our number. She can call our number. She can ask to talk to somebody in her own native language where she can express herself without any obligation to report it to the authorities, just to relieve her stress and then think about how she wants to take the next steps, when she wants to take the next steps, and what will be in the best interest of her family. So that is what we do. We talk to people, we provide them with emotional support so that they can make informed choices for their lives. So it's not only important that there is a law enforcement, there are prisons that are getting all the funding in the world, but it's also important for people to know what their rights are, how they can solve their problems, and giving them that power back, which may have been taken from them.
That was Zakia Afran, Maitri's long-serving client advocate, talking about the importance of funding critical, culturally responsive services that survivors of domestic violence need to address the challenges in their lives. Today, I will share the latest information on one of the major funding streams for these services and seek your support to join us in demanding them. After federal cuts for the Victims of Crimes Act, or VOCA, were confirmed in 2022, California advocates have continued to fight for stabilizing funds from the California Legislature. In early January 2025, when California Governor Gavin Newsom announced the budget for the upcoming fiscal year, it failed to take into account advocates' desires of increased funding for domestic violence services. The federal funding for these life-saving services has been cut in past years, with the most alarming reduction during the 2023 to 2024 fiscal year. In this period, funds were reduced for DVA services by approximately $600 million, causing an average 40% cut to state and territorial victim assistance grants. This has forced victim service programs to reduce or eliminate services, lay off staff, and in some cases, close their doors. We fear many survivors are now facing less support than ever before. Now, that is not to say there haven't been many people willing to fight for the rights of domestic violence survivors. Remember the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, calling out domestic violence in the third week of the pandemic in 2020?
The COVID-19 pandemic is causing untold human suffering and economic devastation around the world. I recently called for an immediate global ceasefire to focus on our shared struggle to overcome the pandemic. I appealed for an end to violence everywhere now. But violence is not confined to the battlefield. For many women and girls, the threat looms largest where they should be safest, in their own homes. And so I make a new appeal today for peace at home and in homes around the world. We know lockdowns and quarantines are essential to suppressing COVID-19, but they can trap women with abusive partners. Over the past weeks, as economic and social pressures and fear have grown, we have seen a horrifying global surge in domestic violence. In some countries, the number of women calling support services has doubled. Meanwhile, healthcare providers and police are overwhelmed and understaffed. Local support groups are paralyzed or short of funds. Some domestic violence shelters are closed. others are fooled. I urge all governments to make the prevention and redress of violence against women a key part of their national response plans for COVID-19. That means increasing investment in online services and civil society organizations, making sure judicial systems continue to prosecute abusers, setting up emergency warning systems in pharmacies and groceries, declaring shelters as essential services, and creating safe ways for women to seek support without alerting their abusers. Women's rights and freedoms are essential to strong, resilient societies. Together we can and must prevent violence everywhere, from war zones to people's homes, as we work to beat COVID-19.
Though we may have come a long way from the beginnings of the COVID-19 pandemic, the fight against violence at home is far from over. Specifically in our state of California, there are higher rates of domestic violence experienced by both men and women when compared to the national average. There were 103 domestic violence-related homicides in California in 2023, of which 74 fatalities were female and 29 were male. Beyond the sociocultural impacts, domestic violence has significant economic impact in California. In 2022, the total cost of domestic violence-related incidents to the state of California was $73.7 billion, or about $230 per person in the United States. Many organizations, including Maitri, are fighting to help. Last year, Maitri provided culturally responsive services to 777 individuals. Organizations around California served more than 57,000 individuals with life-saving support services. In this perpetual crisis, more focus on the issue is greatly required to ensure the safety of survivors. Going back to the California budget, many advocates felt increasingly disheartened and desolate. Amanda Gold from the California Victims of Crimes Act, or VOCA, Advocacy Alliance, and the Los Angeles LGBT Center released a statement in response to the budget proposal. The California VOCA Advocacy Alliance represents over 200 organizations that hundreds of thousands of California victims and survivors depend on each year. The California VOCA Alliance urges Governor Newsom, Speaker Robert Rivas, Senate President Pro Tempore Mike McGuire, and legislators from all political parties to allocate $176 million every year for 5 years to these services. We cannot continue to rely on federal funding streams that have statistically demonstrated trends of decline over the years and could be in even more peril in the future. Here I quote the California VOCA Alliance. The governor's budget fails to adequately fund essential services for survivors of human trafficking, sexual violence, domestic violence, child abuse, and other forms of violence. Last year, the state invested in short-term and long-term solutions, but for at least the next 5 years, communities will need $176 million every year to bridge the gaps that still exist. If these funds are not in the budget, catastrophic Federal Victims of Crimes Act cuts will force hundreds of thousands of Californians to wait months or travel long distances to access of life-saving services needed at a moment's notice. At the center of our budget requests are Californians navigating trauma. The child who has spoken out against their abuser and now must navigate the complex legal system after reporting to the police. The trans survivor of hate violence who needs support navigating her safety from her stalker, and legal advocacy in reporting to the police. The survivor being forced into homelessness because they are fleeing domestic violence. And the survivor of sexual assault and reproductive coercion, forced to navigate complex healthcare systems after suffering a massive trauma. Over 200 organizations are calling on the governor and legislator to provide $176 million each year for 5 years. This funding ensures that when survivors call a crisis hotline, there will be an advocate on the other end to help them access safety. Domestic violence survivors will be able to access shelter when they must flee from violence or lose their housing. LGBTQ+ survivors of sexual assault will have access to mental health care and critical and life-saving legal support. Children will be listened to by a caring and specially trained interviewer during forensic interviews and child abuse investigations. In addition to promoting safety and healing, this funding makes fiscal sense, representing a modest investment of $126.23 per person served by VOCA-funded programs. And I end this quote. Every day, people like you and I can make an impact. Join us in urging Governor Newsom, Speaker Robert Rivas, Senate President pro tempore Mike McGuire, and legislators from all political parties to allocate $176 million every year for 5 years to DVA services. Look up your legislature today and make a difference with a quick call or email. Remember, policies to fund domestic violence programs have the power to determine how new immigrants, like the one Zakia mentioned in the beginning, address their abusive relationships. How we shape our state policies matters, and it's up to us to help make a difference in our communities and our livelihoods.
Thank you for tuning in to the Maitri podcast Between Friends. Please don't forget, you can find all our episodes on Maitri Bay Area's YouTube channel, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Please like, share, and follow Maitri's podcast and social media pages and spread the word. And please visit our website, maitri.org.
This show is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri.